Prof, we are glad to have you on our program.
Thank you so much.
Yes, the president just appointed a new central bank governor. In the same breath, he also appointed an acting CEO of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. Let's start with the central bank governor. What would be your advice, assuming he reached out to you? What would be your advice to the central bank governor?
I hope he does. Of course, it's about the mandate of the central bank, which primarily is to maintain monetary and price stability. But let me even start by saying that I think the appointment is in order in the sense that Yemi Cardoso is somebody I think is eminently qualified to occupy the position, given his pedigree, and also the people that the president has appointed to support him, the 4 deputy governors. I think, again, going by their background, they are also fit for purpose. So having a round peg in a round hole is the first step. And the central bank is one institution, that I consider too sensitive to have someone in an acting capacity for too long. That's why I said the appointment is in order. You don't put somebody in an acting capacity in the central bank for too long because of the sensitive nature of the central bank. So I think the appointment will send some right signals to markets and holds a lot of promise for stability in the financial system. Now, talking about my advice to him, as I said earlier on, it revolves around the mandate of the bank, which is maintaining monetary and price stability. Now, price in terms of the 3 prices, talking about inflation, you see where inflation rate is today. Inflation is still rising, and the latest figure by the National Bureau of Statistics, talks about an inflation rate of over 25%. And taming inflation is a primary responsibility of the central bank, even though I recognize that a lot of factors driving inflation in the country are actually beyond the control of the central bank, talking about the supply side factors now. But the new central bank governor has a responsibility to also ensure that the monetary aspect of it, is tamed. And of course, there is the issue of the exchange rate, which is another price. Again, the forex market challenge, for me, remains a very big challenge for the central bank governor. How he, manages it will be critical. But again, managing it also has to do with the demand side, because there is very little, that's the reality, that the central bank governor can do in terms of the supply of forex, because supply of forex is unfortunately a function of your export base. All right, so we don't as a country have a diversified export base. We don't as a country have significant inflows of foreign direct investment, and so you should expect that the supply side will be challenged. But the demand side is where the pressure is, and I think the central bank governor can also do some demand management measures or strategies to be able to reduce the pressure. And for me, one thing that he can quickly do is to look at that currency swap arrangement we have with China, to explore the possibility of renewing it and possibly scaling it up, to a level that can accommodate more imports. By that I mean, if you look at our trade volumes, the last 5 years, China is dominating, and if that is the case, then it would make sense for him to see how we can rely less on the dollar in terms of settling our transactions with China. That way, it will go a long way to reduce the pressure on the demand for dollars. I talked about CBN governor doing something about the demand side. And way that he can do something about the demand side is to, as I said, take a second look at that currency swap agreement with China, because I think that is one way to reduce the pressure on the, on the dollars. So for him, that is a challenge, the issue of forex liquidity. And he should also see how he can put in place measures to incentivize diaspora remittances through the formal channels. Of course, we know that a lot of diaspora remittances come into this country, but much of it is, comes in outside the formal channel, and that's why they are not captured in reserves, and that's why we don't find the impact on the exchange rate. All right. Now, the other price, I talked about inflation. I've just talked about exchange rate, which is the second price. The other price element too that he has to look into has to be the interest rates. Okay, the interest rate environment in this country is quite high. The regime is high, and that is why a lot of businesses are not having access to credit. So the central bank governor should work towards having a low interest rate, environment. Of course, that has to come with lower inflation rate, because you can't have high inflation rate and then have a lower exchange rate and low, interest rates. I know central banks operate within what is called the policy trilemma, but I also think that as the central bank governor, he can also influence a low interest rate environment by not increasing the monetary policy rate each time the MPC meets. The monetary policy rate is the anchor of interest rates in the country. As we speak, is already high at 18.75%, and I think the MPC, which is chaired by the central bank governor, should work towards, an accommodative monetary policy, the type that helps to support, GDP growth. Now, I also think one area that the central bank governor must look into has to do with this issue of printing money to support government deficit, central bank's ways and means. In the previous administration, ways and means grew. The previous administration, was collecting a lot of money from the central bank to finance deficits, okay, which impact fueled inflation. So I think this central bank governor should not always use resort to ways and means, to support government deficit. Even when it has to be done, he has to go by what is provided in the CBN Act. There is a limit. It shouldn't be more than 5% of the previous year's, government's actual revenue, even though I know the National Assembly is now trying to increase it to 15%. So whatever it is, the CBN governor should stick to the law, should be guided by the CBN Act, and should not, do things that are seen to be in breach of the CBN Act itself. So it is responsibility to implement policies in line with the Central Bank Act. This is what we find missing, or I think was missing in the last administration, where CBN ways and means were, in terms of what the Act says, that was not adhered to. So I think these are the things the CBN governor should focus on. As I said, primarily ensuring monetary and price stability, price in terms of inflation, interest rates, and the exchange rate. And of course, it's also his responsibility to ensure that the banks are properly supervised, because the central bank also has a responsibility to supervise the banks. And the banks need to be supervised properly to ensure, number one, they don't flout regulations that border on exchange rate on the forex market, and two, that they are also performing their functions. Banks are supposed to be intermediate between the surplus units and the deficit units, but we find that banks are not really doing what they ought to do in terms of financial intermediation, and that's why the risk sectors of the economy are not growing, because they are not really getting the credit they ought to get.
A lot of people, I've heard some experts say that the federal government needs to do a lot of work in supporting programs of the central bank. They have said that the central bank cannot do it alone. As much as they're trying to change policy, they need to see government policies that are also helping the work that the central bank is doing. And one of the areas they have talked about in terms of our economy is diversification of our income streams. They've talked about manufacturing. They've also talked about encouraging local production. They've also talked about low interest rates for specific segments or sectors of the economy to encourage people to, go into manufacturing. What do you think should be the synergy between the government of the day and the central bank?
Yeah, thank you. You see, when we talk about macro stability, it's not the function of the monetary authority alone or the fiscal authority alone. The two must join hands to bring about monetary, macroeconomic stability. So we can't overemphasize the need for the monetary and fiscal authorities to have a very firm handshake. Because as I tried to explain earlier, inflation rate in the country today is driven not only by monetary factors, but also by supply side factors, all right? And these supply side factors, such as food shortages, can only be tackled by the fiscal authority, the government. And how do you tackle food shortage? One of the ways by which you can do that is even to begin to deal with insecurity. That's preventing farmers from going to farms, all right? And of course, invest in agriculture. So the government needs to invest in agriculture. The government needs to also put in place policies that should support, SME growth for that to happen. It is not the function of the duty of the central bank, all right? So you saw, because of the disconnect we had in the previous administration, because of the disconnect, the central bank appeared to go into a whole lot of areas. In the last administration, for example, we saw the central bank veering into a whole lot of areas. Central bank was intervening in agriculture, intervening in manufacturing, intervening in even the power sector, airlines, virtually everywhere. And that was because the fiscal authorities, were found wanting in those areas. All right? But in this new dispensation, I would expect the fiscal authorities to take up their responsibilities in agriculture, in the economy generally, while the central bank, will also focus on its mandate. All right? Yes, I understand the central bank has a development finance function, but that finance function should also be in tandem with the fiscal authority. So there's no doubt about it that this is the time to have a firm handshake between the two, both the monetary authorities and the fiscal authorities. And I think the central bank governor, the new central bank governor, understands that he can't really function alone. He has to have a handshake with the fiscal authority. And the good thing about it is that the Minister of Finance and coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Waledu, and the current CBN Governor, Yemi Cardoso, they were colleagues in the Lagos State Cabinet under the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu when he was Governor of Lagos State. So they were colleagues, they are still friends. So that relationship is what I expect, to
you should leverage on.
And of course, I expect that will rub off positively on the economy because of the understanding that both of them are going to have in running the economy.
One of the key appointments that the president made this passing week was appointing a new head or acting head for the FIRS. And I was reading something just about 12 hours or about 24 hours after that appointment. And the former FIRS head was saying that he was almost going to hit 13 trillion revenue by the end of the year. He actually said that by June, the FIRS had in their kitty about 8 trillion, which was a record breaker for the agency. And a lot of Nigerians are asking, what do they get in return? What do they get in return? Revenue in terms of taxes are going up. What do they get in return in terms of infrastructure, in terms of stability of the economy, in terms of health, education? I mean, where is the sync between this high revenues that the FIRS is announcing and what is happening to the ordinary Nigerian? How does it rub off on the ordinary Nigerian?
Oh yes, that's a very good question. Of course, you know that the outgoing or outgone FIRS chairman, Nami's tenure is actually supposed to end this year. And what the president has done is to ask him to go on pre-retirement leave. So he has asked his SA revenue to continue. Let me also say that I am aware that the FIRS has under NAMI has done a lot to boost government revenue. And before now, we used to say that the tax to GDP ratio was around 6%, but under NAMI, I think that has gone up to like 8% tax to GDP ratio. So he did a lot to actually shore up the revenue tax revenue base of the country. But I'm also confident that the new person will continue from where he has stopped. And the good thing is that this new person who has been SA to the president has also been part of the vision. The government is intending to move up this tax revenue ratio tax to GDP ratio I talked about from 8% to 18%, by 2025. But what is interesting about that target is that there isn't any plan, to the best of my knowledge, to increase taxes, in the interim. I think the government hopes to achieve that by, expanding the tax net and bringing more people into the tax net. Not that there's intention to increase taxes. You asked a very good question. The issue of social contracts. As a matter of fact, just I was discussing it with somebody just a while ago. It was the issue of why do people evade tax? Why is it that the propensity or the tendency to evade tax is very high in Nigeria? It has to do with the social contract, the failure on the part of government, to fulfill its own part. Okay, a situation where individuals or firms provide virtually everything they need that the government ought to have provided. Okay, things like power, for example. If you're a small business, you have to bother about power. You get a generator. Water. You provide your own water. You provide your own security. You at some point too, you have to also help to do the road to your office and so on. So when you look at all these things, it does not encourage people to voluntarily say they want to pay tax, because on the part of government, they also feel the government is slacking. Government is not meeting its own responsibilities. So that is the failure of the social contract, that has been with us. But I also think the new government recognizes that if it must collect taxes from people, it also owes them a responsibility to provide basic amenities. All right, that is what the social contract is all about. So I think going forward, this is likely to change. And I say this from an insider point of perspective, because I am a member of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. So what I'm saying is based on what I know, that there is no plan, to the best of my knowledge, to increase taxes at the moment. And I'm also aware that the government is also serious about ensuring that whatever is realized is also used to provide basic amenities, for the people.
One of the biggest worries of many Nigerians is actually the continuous slide of the naira and the rising inflation. You've given us a broad suggestion of what you think that the central bank governor. But can we get, a shock therapy? What can happen in the immediate to, slow the slide of the naira and also hold down the ever-increasing inflation rate in the country? What can the central bank do now?
What the central bank can do now, remember I told you, in terms of supply, the challenge we are having in the forex market is liquidity, supply. In terms of supply now, there's little the central bank governor can do, but there's something the government can do to improve supply. And what is that? It is dealing with crude oil theft. Crude oil theft. Vin, our OPEC quota is 1.74 million barrels per day. But what we are producing, even according to the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, and even the recent OPEC report that was released, what we are producing is just 1.2 million barrels per day. So you have a deficit of over 500,000 barrels per day. And oil price is increasing, now above $90 per barrel. So we are not taking advantage of the rise in oil price because we are not even meeting our production quota. So 500,000 barrels per day is 15 million barrels in a month. If you multiply that by the current, let us even say $85 or $90 per barrel, you get over $1 billion. That's what we are losing in a month. So if you deal with crude oil theft now and pipeline vandalism and you're able to meet your production quota of 1.74, you get over $1 billion in a month. Extra. So that can do something in the immediate, yes. So as I said, the government can do something immediately by using our security forces, involving the local communities to deal with crude oil theft. That's the immediate thing that can be done. All right. With respect to inflation, okay, what they can do immediately again, because the problem of inflation in Nigeria is coming more from food. Food inflation is where the pressure is. If you look at the inflation number by the National Bureau of Statistics, it says food inflation is now close to 30%. All right? While inflation rate is 25%, food inflation is now 30%. So that is where the pressure is. And what is food inflation? Again, rising price of food items. And why is that so? It has to do with food shortages. So if government can quickly also, it's not about even distributing rice and so on, because when you do that, you end up mopping up these foodstuffs from the market, and also you're also increasing the prices. So it's about producing them, okay, investing in their production. So government says it wants to cultivate, I think, extra 150,000 hectares of land, okay, across the states. So that is the way to go, okay, in conjunction with the state governments who own the land, okay, ensure that you have more areas of, where you can use to cultivate rice, maize, and some of these products that are, in regular demand. So, and that also means ensuring that you have put in place, whatever that can enable all year farming. Yeah. So it is investing in agriculture, putting a lot of money in that sector. And the good thing is that the president has declared an emergency on agriculture, but that should be matched with action. Okay, it's not about what the federal government alone. The state governors too must be all involved. All right, to ensure that this thing about food security, is achieved. Because except we produce, okay, except we also deal with insecurity, okay. And I'm also happy the president recently set up a committee on farmers' herders clashes. That's another good move, because that will also help to reduce these farmers' herders clashes, help to also reduce insecurity, and allow farmers to, go to farms.
Prof, I must thank you.
Thank you too.
For coming on our show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay.